Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm coming to you with my thoughts on Romantasy as a publishing category. I've been wanting to make this video for a while because I just keep getting more and more frustrated with this new trend in marketing, and not because I don't like the books that are in it by any means. It is the marketing that is going on that I do not like, that is making my life increasingly difficult as a reader. Firstly, I'm going to go into the differences between fantasy romance and romantic fantasy, both of which are comprised, as part of the blanket term romantasy, and I don't think that these two things belong together in the same marketing category. So firstly, fantasy romance is first and foremost romance. It has to have a happy ending. That is an actual convention of the romance genre, and it is so stringent that basically a book could have all the trappings of a romance book, and if it does not end happily for our two main characters, it is not actually a romance book. It is romantic fiction or something to that effect. So someone picking up a romance book is looking for a book where they know by the end that the two main characters are going to be able to be together with nothing standing in their way, regardless of what conflicts occur throughout the story. A romantic fantasy makes no such guarantee at all. It is not it does not inherently have to be a romance book in that regard. So that is a pretty big difference. So when we go to pick up a romantasy book, not knowing whether it is a fantasy romance or a romantic fantasy, that is something that, in the event that a book does not end happily, that is just something that a romance reader would want to have guaranteed, whereas not necessarily every romantic fantasy has to have that. The other really big difference between the two is that fantasy romance tends to be more about the couple. You are rooting for the couple to be together, whereas romantic fantasy tends to try to get the reader to swoon over the usually male love interest. Examples of fantasy romance include Lord of the Fading Lands and Between Wrath and Mercy, whereas examples of romantic fantasy include Fourth Wing and A Court of Mist and Fury. There has actually been a really big market for fantasy romance for many, many years. So the indie market has done pretty well with that because TradPub just didn't really want to pick that up. So there have been a lot of indie authors for several years who have been publishing fantasy romance. So it just seems a little bit strange to me that suddenly TradPub does want to pick this up and market this, only they're putting romantic fantasy into the same category. And therefore, the term romantasy has made its way into the indie market as well, in that indie authors who, whether they were publishing fantasy romance or romantic fantasy, are also using the term romantasy really heavily now, which still, even in the indie market, you're having a hard time differentiating between fantasy romance and romantic fantasy. So I personally, as a reader, I reach for a lot of fantasy romance and not so much a lot of romantic fantasy. And I'm not picking on either of the two. It's just that I, as a reader, and I'm glad that more people want to read steamy books. This is great, actually. It's a way of crushing the patriarchy. It might be getting more people to read fantasy. So that all is inherently really, really good. But what frustrates me as a reader is that now I cannot tell what is fantasy romance versus romantic fantasy. Therefore, I have to do a lot more legwork just to determine whether or not I should pick up a book. And with romantasy becoming so popular lately, it's even encompassing books that are not really primarily about the romance, such as my recent read, Blood Beneath the Snow. This is primarily just fantasy. It has very little to do with the love story at all. they put some sex scenes in it and call it romantasy because that's more marketable. I don't know. So I feel like often, like, not only is it harder to tell what is fantasy romance versus romantic fantasy, but now just books that are just fantasy are being marketed as romantasy because that's just what's marketable. And that makes it even harder to tell. So those are my thoughts on the marketing category that is romantasy, and why I wish it would just stop, and why I really don't think it should be such a bad thing to call things romantic fantasy versus fantasy romance, with those two genres being so different. No matter how much they overlap, they are not the same. It's just making my life difficult as a reader. So anyway, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and let me know what your favorite romantasy books are lately as well. And I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!